Hello, 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 and welcome. Welcome to today's installment of Created for More, the podcast. Today, I bring you a solo show where I am going to be teaching you on a topic that I have been thinking about a lot this week. I did a newsletter on it, and I thought, you know what, I will follow up by actually doing a podcast just to, further, drive home some points that I think, firmly need to be understood. So you're a visionary, you have a path that you're pursuing, um, you're really, really into it, everything you're putting all of your energy, all of your strength. And then at some point, things start to get a little bit too difficult, and you kind of feel like, you know what, it's like you're pushing a boulder up a hill, and you're like, oh my goodness. And then you're like, is it time to give up? So today I am challenging the notion around giving up. A lot of times people associate giving up with either, you know what, you are lazy, or maybe the passion that you had originally wasn't actually authentic. So, it's coming to bear now that this wasn't you, or maybe you were pretending, and all this sorts of funny stuff. Is there a time where giving up is actually a good thing to do? Or are there some things that you should do, or some criteria that you should pass through, or a checklist that you should be, going through to make an assessment or a determination on whether or not giving up is actually the right thing for you to do in a particular scenario? If that is you, hey, you are in luck. Grab a coffee, let's get comfortable as we dive deep into this conversation today. So where did this all come from? This week I received news that a project that I've been working on, was starting to slow down significantly. Actually, was it this week or last week? Probably last week now, actually. It's starting to blur into one. It was starting to slow down significantly, and there was this, kind of looming view. It wasn't quite said, let's give up, but it was just kind of implied, is this the right thing to do? So I got off the call. We didn't make a decision on the call. I was speaking to somebody who I was working on that project with. We didn't make a decision on the call, but by the time I got off the call, I started, really thinking, it's easy for us to just throw in the towel. It's easy to just throw in the towel and say, well, it's not easy. Sometimes it's actually difficult, but sometimes you are justified if you say, this thing that I was thinking I was doing then, it no longer works for me, so I'm just going to just give up. But there's some times where an assessment is actually useful, or can be useful, and that is why I came up with 5 key points, 5 key things that you should consider, and really reflect on before you decide to give up or not. So the first one, I'm going to read through them. So the first one is giving it a go. Yes, I know it sounds obvious. You're like, what, Tamara, did you say? Yes, giving it a go. Have you actually given it a good go? So before you get to the point where you make a determination that something is not worth pursuing anymore, you have to really, really make sure that you have given it all. And I mean all of you. So don't say, you know what, I'm going to give up on something when you know for yourself that you have been spending spare time or no time, or you've been doing it without any heart or soul, you've been doing it with lack of interest or anything like that. If you haven't actually given something a decent try with your heart, soul, sweat, blood, then it will not be a good reason, or whatever you're thinking, it will not be good for you to just walk away from it. I was reading this book, I think Grit by Angela Duckworth, and in the book she talks about a system that she has in her house where she's got 2 daughters, I believe, and neither of her daughters are allowed to give up on anything that they start unless they've done it consecutively for about 12 weeks or so, she said, so about a term, which I think is 12 weeks. So i.e. they start piano classes, whatever they do, they can't give up until they've at least dedicated 12 weeks to that thing, because that is how she's evidencing, that they've actually given it a good good goal. So I don't know what that is for you. So it might also help when you're starting new projects or new activities or initiatives that you are saying how long you will spend and, you know, keep going until, you know, it makes sense to just leave it if you are not seeing any progress. Okay? The second point is um, when you've sought help, yeah, have you sought help around the thing that you are doing before making a determination that it's no longer worthwhile to continue? Beyond just yourself and your immediate team, have you sought help from people who know a little bit more about the context or the area in which you're working, who have a little bit more expertise, or who, you know, who generally mean well and know a little bit more? So the point around this here is that don't depend exclusively on what you know or what you can do, either yourself or just your immediate nucleus, to fulfill a particular task or activity or project or whatever. So if you are finding difficulty in something that you're doing and trying to progress, have you sought help? Have you consulted on the matter? Is there anybody else beyond yourself that can bring, you know, something new to the table? Think mentors, think coaches, think supportive friends, families, associates, but generally anyone with a little bit more insight than you have to offer will be definitely good to draw on before you make the determination that what you're pursuing is no longer needed, because that can very well be the missing piece that you need to enter into the breakthrough that you so desperately desire. Okay? Are you ready for number 3? Number 3 is, have you checked? Are you sure that there is there an alignment with your goals, overarching visions, and aspirations? And why this is important is that there's some times where you make a decision to do something and you don't know what you don't know, right? Until you get into the doing, before you know, things become a little bit clearer. They say clarity comes with doing. Movement breeds momentum, and momentum breeds clarity. So until you get really stuck in, you don't really know, right? It looks like what you want from the outside, but when you get in, you find out that, oh no, actually it's not quite what I want. You know, at that point, you know, should you continue? Should you just keep going because you've already determined that this is what you're going to do and you've got the timeline that you've set aside? Should you continue going? So at that point, it really doesn't make sense for you to reevaluate and really reappraise your decision to continue with that thing, right? So one thing I want to say here, and say it really loudly and clearly and speak to your subconscious, hopefully, is that there is absolutely no shame in acknowledging that a thing is not for you. There is no shame in acknowledging that a thing that you're doing is going against your personal beliefs and convictions. And sometimes you only get that information when you are neck deep, right? Because when you do those things and you continue to progress you then enter into a situation where you are wasting your energy, you're wasting your sweat, you're wasting your potential. So you want to make sure that you're being true to yourself and you're only giving of yourself to those things that are truly in alignment with your visions and your aspirations, and generally take you to that place where you want to go. Okay, so make sure that you're testing it against your vision and aspirations, rather than just assuming that, you know, because you are in it, you can't give up. So I'm kind of mixing in give up, you know. Anyway, you do the math and figure it out. I'm on to number 4 now. Number 4 thing that you do before you make that decision around whether or not to give up, you've got to consider very carefully is, have you crafted a plan. So leaving something behind without effectively thinking about what you could replace that thing with isn't generally always a good move. It's never a wise move, because why? Nature abhors vacuum. So if there's an empty space, you're not doing anything with your time, those resources, that resource that you had previously to push into this endeavor, energy, money, everything, whatever it is, it will just get eaten away. That's true, because if you do not assign, if you do not appropriate your time, it's just going to go with anything that comes with the wind, and you do not want that. So whenever if you're making a decision, part of the considerations around making a decision to move on from a thing should really be around what else is there. And if the decision is moving on because I don't want to do anything, that in itself is a decision that you should be happy that you make. The key thing to say here is that it has to be a conscious decision. Just leaving it and just being without a decision to either rest or take up something else is what I find that would, what I know or will be overall detrimental to that person that you are who wants to achieve these things. So key thing here to say is that don't waste your precious resources. Make sure that everything that you are, everything that you stand for is effectively channeled into the things that you want them to be. You want to live by design and not by default. And then moving on to number 5, which is the 5th one and the final consideration around whether or not giving up is the right thing to do, is changing the narrative. It's changing the thinking around that that plan to give up. So if you've then gone through all of this, and then the idea, and then you get to the point where it's, giving up really in fact is the best thing for me to do, you want to make sure that the thinking around it and your mentality around it is the right one. First things first, it's moving on, not giving up. Really, really important. Language is the language of this, I tell you, is super important. You've got to re-educate yourself around it and say to yourself, like, look, I'm not giving up, I am just moving up. And there is a difference. Giving up, like if you imagine a runner who is doing a 100-meter sprint, giving up is starting the race and then halfway through just walking off the track and just going in a perpendicular direction. However, the alternative is the man who says, you know what, this race is not for me. I have an injury in my leg. I'm just not going to participate in it. Yeah, and I'll move on to the next competition at some point when an opportunity does present itself. You can see and they're two completely different things. There's moving on, and then there is actually, in fact, giving up. So language here is really, really important. Make sure that you are empowering yourself around this decision. So you're thinking empowering thoughts. Because why? Why is this important? Because it helps you stand against, the critics and the naysayers when they come for you and say, hey, but you were doing that last week. Hey, now you're no longer doing it. I told you, blah, blah, blah. You can say, you know what? I made a decision to move on for these reasons. Not that you owe anybody an explanation, generally, or maybe there's some people that you do, but the point around it is make sure that for yourself you are mentally attuned to empowering thoughts around your decision to move on. No one can make you feel bad about a thing without your permission, and we give them that permission when you yourself don't have conviction in the decisions that you have made. So make sure that in your mind you know what you're doing and you're prepared, so you can face the onslaught of questions or whatever anybody throws at you. I hope you found that beneficial. I find that a lot of people always, when you see all the motivational speeches and all these things, everyone say that don't give up, don't give up, don't give up, and I feel that people in the space, impactpreneurs like yourself, are getting fatigued when it comes to what they should be doing around this. There's sometimes where giving up is actually the right thing to do. I don't think enough people are having conversations around it. So that's why I thought that it was important that I brought this message to you, and I hope it's a timely one. So make sure you appraise what you're doing against these five great sets of criteria. The first one is making sure you've given it a good go. Don't to say you've tried when you haven't really tried. Have you really tried? You will know if you have. The second one is seeking help if you need to, before you make the decision to walk away, making sure that you don't rely alone on yourself and your immediate nucleus. The third one is making sure that there is indeed a misalignment or an alignment or whatever it is, with your vision. If there is, then you want to see what you can do to ensure that you salvage things. But if there isn't, then it's fine. And then making sure that you have a plan. Again, nature abhors vacuum. So if you're not moving on to something else, that time is going to be taken up. And then the fifth one is making sure the narrative around it is empowering for you, so it's moving on and not giving up. It was lovely as usual to have this podcast with you. Let me know what your thoughts are. Send me a message. I'd love to hear from you, and I look forward to being back with you next week with another exciting episode. You take care.